Hello and welcome to a special edition of Apfelfunk am Hörer. Let me introduce ourselves to the international audience who might see us for the first time. Jean-Claude Frick from Switzerland. Hello, Jean-Claude.
Hello.
And me, Malte Kirchner from Germany. We're recording a weekly podcast called Apfelfunk. It started as a small podcast with a wonderful, very intelligent audience who loves good devices and even more good software. So we talk about Apple, and once a month we do a show called Apfelfunk am Hörer, in which we talk with listeners of the show, interesting guests, and with our good friend and colleague Raphael Zeyer from Switzerland, who became part of the show. Hello, Raphael.
Hello.
So today we are recording a show in English language, and I apologize in advance for all the harm I do to your ears. This is a big first here for us today. We have two guests from Apple. And I think that I can speak for the three of us that it is a great honor and pleasure to be speaking with Andreas Wendker and Wiley Hodges today. Hello to California.
Hello. Hello from California.
Thank you for being here today. Let me introduce you for our viewers. Andreas, you are the head of developer tools and technologies. Can you explain us a little bit about your role?
Yeah, sure. I manage our tools and frameworks team, so that includes, all the kind of low-level developer tools from the Swift language and the compiler, all the way up to our IDE Xcode, and then frameworks like SwiftUI, AppKit, and UIKit.
And Wiley, you are from product marketing. Can you also introduce yourself?
Sure. I am in charge of the core technologies and developer tools product marketing team, and so we actually oversee the product management and marketing of a number of different sort of lower level components of the operating systems that actually span Apple products. And of course, developer tools and technologies, the things in Andreas's world, which are actually really exciting.
They are.
So let's start this conversation with a small personal note and thank you. At Apfelfunk, we surprisingly talk a lot about the weather. Also, Apple, of course, is our main topic. So we're glad to see that there is now an official Apple Weather app on the iPad. And what's even more awesome, and now we talk about development, is that there's even an API, because implementing weather into an app wasn't easy at all before. I found that out myself. So if we talk about the weather in upcoming podcast episodes, we can be much more precise. And before I ask my first question, I would like to say thank you for WeatherKit and the Weather app.
You will make the Apfelfunk podcast much better with that.
So let's talk about the WWDC. This WWDC is, after all, a first step on the road back to getting normal. And I just would like to ask you in general, how was this week for you so far? How did you experience this new WWDC with a mixture of online and presence?
Yeah, WWDC is always such an exciting and amazing time for us engineers here at Apple. We kind of work in secret for most of the year, and then at WWDC we can go and show the world what we've been working on and meet developers and hear directly from them what their experience is, and it's always a really invigorating time for us to talk to them. And we are really glad that we were able to have at least a smaller part of our developer community join us in person again and meeting them in person again after 2 years of being entirely online. So it's been a really exciting week, and we've enjoyed talking to our developer community directly again.
Yeah, and I would just echo what Andreas said. It's always a great time for those of us who deal with developers and developer technologies. The energy on Monday, we're speaking to you Wednesday, and of course we have had some time to process this. It was just electric at Apple Park. I think that experience of being in the room with, over 1,000 people who actually care about development, building great products, is always just a lot of fun, and I think really helps energize the teams and excite them going forward.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the same as also I thought. I was in California on Monday, and it was thrilling. I thought everyone I met said that he's happy not having some WebEx calls anymore, or at the moment at least. Well, I have a question. I want to go dive in directly. One of the topics at the WWDC keynote, there was this crazy, I say it like that, this crazy live text API. Can you explain a little bit how that works? It looks like magic, but how is that possible to do that? How that works?
So we've been invested for many years now in our machine learning techniques, and we've been able to really go deep on that and train our models, and we've gotten to the point where now we can very reliably detect text in images and now even in videos. It's so fast now that we can do it basically in a video stream.
I do think one of the really cool parts of what LiveText offers is it's not just the technology story of this incredible capability to recognize images, even, by the way, do some cool shortcut actions, like you can follow a URL that you see in a picture or make a phone call based on a phone number you see on a sign. But those experiences around that, the UI for that, are actually the same as what we've offered in the LiveText feature in the system. So now developers get that consistent, powerful experience for their end users.
Apple makes Xcode Cloud available for everyone this year. So this seems to me like a big step forward for app development. I would like to translate this to the non-expert. Can you explain where you see the advantages of Xcode Cloud?
Yeah, sure. We're actually very excited to bring Xcode Cloud to the developer community. It is a new service that we launched as a beta version a year ago, and we've really spent the last year listening to developers, how they're using it and improving the product. And we are very pleased to announce that it's now available to all developers. It is a service that is really meant to help developers at every stage of the development process by saving them time, speeding things up, automating things for them. That includes things like testing and distributing their apps to beta testers. And Xcode Cloud is basically there for them at each step in this development process and makes it easier for them to reach their goals. And the benefit of that is that they can really focus on their own code. They don't have to worry about kind of like the maybe somewhat mundane tasks of just like repeatedly running tests. Xcode Cloud will do that for them, automated in the cloud. And so it really allows them to stay in the flow. And we think that will lead to higher quality apps. It will give developers a better, more comprehensive understanding of what their app is doing. So they'll be able to move more confidently, more quickly, and frankly ship new versions of their apps more frequently. So it's an all-around benefit. It makes their own work more fun and more streamlined and faster, and it directly translates into better end-user apps.
Yeah, and I think I just obviously agree with everything Andreas just said, and add one point, which is that these kinds of capabilities of continuous integration and continuous delivery have been things that were tools at the disposal of some of the largest developers for some time now. I think the really amazing thing about Xcode Cloud is that it makes these capabilities far more accessible to every developer of any size.
Yeah, okay. I have a question about this, this cross-platform apps that can be developed for Mac and for iPad. Just as a non-developer, as I'm unfortunately are, how complicated is it to transform an app, let's say from Mac to iPad, or the other way around, from iPad to the Mac? Is it a big thing, or is this just, let's say, just some clicks in the Xcode?
Yeah, we're trying to make that, of course, as easy as possible. Our goal is to enable developers to reach every user possible, right? And that doesn't always mean the same type of device. Many of our users like using several types of our devices. They like using a Mac and an iPad. And so developers want to reach their customers in different ways. And so we are trying to make it as easy as possible to bring apps to several of our platforms at the same time. And the best way to do that is to write an app in Swift UI. This combination of Swift UI, and Xcode previews is really what we are focused on as our future vision and direction for developing apps. And the big advantage of Swift UI is that a lot of the code you write for one platform can be reused for other platforms as well. Often it can be literally the identical code. And but the reality is that most developers don't start from scratch with a new app. There's most developers have code bases that are many years old, and so they are not necessarily on Swift and Swift UI yet. And so we're also investing in other technologies to make it easy for developers to bring apps from one platform to the other. Mac Catalyst is a great example for that, where Mac Catalyst is basically a re-implementation of the iOS APIs on macOS. And so the result is that you can pretty much use the same code base that you have for an iPad app and rebuild the app and run it on macOS, and then just make a few very minor modifications. So it's something that we explicitly created to enable developers to very quickly bring an app from the iPad to the Mac. And sometimes it goes the other direction as well. What we are noticing, for example, is that on iPad, apps become more and more powerful. They become more and more loaded with pro features. And there's features on the Mac that users are used to that they also want on the iPad. And in fact, we made a big push this year with what we call desktop class iPad apps, where we've brought APIs for features that users already have on the Mac but want on the iPad. We brought those APIs to iPadOS, and so you now have new APIs for seamless find and replace experiences, customizable toolbars, a new document menu. So we're also looking at the other direction. How can we take experiences that people are used to on the Mac and bring it to the iPad? And so it's quite a bit of a focus for us to make it easy for our developers to support several of our platforms at the same time. Another great example is actually WidgetKit, which now is literally the same API between iOS and watchOS, and you can literally use the same code to create widgets for both platforms. And so we're going to continue doing that, making it easy to develop apps that run on our entire ecosystem.
Talking about cross-platform,
I was going to say, I do want to put a plug in here that we also have this great feature in Xcode this year, which is the cross-platform app template that is designed expressly to make it incredibly easy for starting out creating an app that runs across iPhone, iPad, and Mac.
That's right.
From the scratch, right?
Yeah, and with a shared code base across all, where, like Andreas said, you're going to think about how the experience differs and create sort of unique elements that are for each of the platforms, but you get to share a vast amount of code, and it dramatically simplifies writing and maintaining that app.
Since we're on the topic right now about sharing code and cross-platform, where it also played a big role during the opening keynote was games. How different are the needs of game developers compared to, I call them normal app developers? How do they differ from the other ones? What different needs do they have?
I think one of the key differences for game developers is that they first of all are going to be focused much more on things like graphics performance. They're going to be delivering rich 3D visuals typically in their apps and creating immersive experiences that they own entirely. Our other developers understandably are going to rely very heavily on our UI frameworks and things like this. Whereas for game developers, that's kind of a less important aspect of the experience. For them, it's more about the performance and about the features that enable these kind of visuals that they want. And if you look at what we've been doing for games, I think it's an amazing time for being a game developer on the Mac or on any Apple platform. But for the Mac, you think about the fact that with the introduction of Apple Silicon, we've got incredible performance across the product line for games. And with Metal 3, we're delivering features that we think are going to make it even easier to build incredible games for all of our platforms, including Mac. And our focus has been on the kind of unique needs, like a lot of game developers rely heavily on C++. We've talked about Swift and how great it is. It's not a big language in the gaming space, and so we've done things like put a lot of effort into C++ integration with Metal CPP. We've been delivering new tools for Unity so that you can actually bring Apple ecosystem features and unique capabilities, things like advanced accessibility features to games in Unity, and that's Apple technology that we're sharing. And so we've really thought hard about how to deliver great experiences for gamers through making it much easier to build these fantastic games for Apple platforms.
And how tricky is it to bring the different input methods over all your devices? You have touchscreens, you have remotes, and you have keyboards and mice. How tricky is that for developers? I have no idea. How is this difficult, or is this a problem you already solved for them?
I mean, I think that there are aspects of where developers may want to create a unique experience with touch, where they'll want to build their own kinds of gesture handling code and things along those lines. But we've built so much for developers that enables to get this sort of for free out of the box. One of the keys to this is the Game Controller Framework, which is a framework that's available across iPhone, iPad, Apple TV, and Mac. And not only allows you to have things like a touch controller on a touch device without any additional accessory controller, but also supports a huge range of the best game controllers from PCs and consoles and things like that. In fact, I think we just added Switch control support to game controllers.
Thanks for that very much.
This year, but we've already supported PlayStation controllers and Xbox controllers, and of course our own game controllers that we've worked with through the MFI program historically. And so there's really an amazing amount of support for game input already built into the platform.
So I would like to ask a question about starting developing. I always try to encourage people to start developing, possibly to make the best-selling app on the App Store, but at least to get a better understanding how devices work, how software works. And a question I always heard is, which is the best option to start when I want to develop for iOS devices or for Apple devices? There are two great ways. One is Swift Playgrounds, which has changed from a learning app for kids to a very serious development environment. And on the other hand, there's Xcode, which is also improving from year to year, but is a very powerful tool with many switches and things I can choose from. So is there a recommendation which way to start if you like to start developing?
I mean, I am unequivocally going to say Swift Playgrounds because it is always the best place to learn to code. And so if you don't know anything about coding, I can't think of a better way to be introduced to coding than what Swift Playgrounds offers. One of the great things about how we've evolved Swift Playgrounds is that we've made it much easier to follow that path, kind of graduating, if you will, from Swift Playgrounds to Xcode. And there's a couple of aspects to that. One is we've, of course, some time ago introduced Swift Playgrounds on Mac. And so it is possible to actually run Swift Playgrounds on the same device that you could eventually run Xcode on. But also, very importantly, we've done things like build a Swift package format that works in Swift Playgrounds for Playgrounds projects that then is easily moved into Xcode for app projects. And so you have a very clear kind of graduation path from Swift Playgrounds into Xcode when you reach the point where it makes sense to do so. But as you noted, you can now get to the point of building an entire app and even submitting it to the App Store directly from Swift Playgrounds on iPad or Mac.
And it's really always been one of the big design points of Swift Playgrounds to teach coding real-world code. It is not a tool that tries to teach programming concepts in an abstract way. You have a source editor, and you're learning how to write Swift code. And we noticed that once you understand the specific teaching content that we created for the app that we call Learn to Code, that the next step after that is for learners to go and explore on their own. And that's why we created this ability to create full apps, because that is the next step that they want to do, right? Once they understand the basic concepts, they want to create a whole app. And Swift Playground now covers this entire range from an absolute beginner who's writing the first lines of code all the way to creating apps. And at the same time, Swift Playgrounds, like you said, just stays a lot simpler than Xcode. Xcode is a professional IDE that supports multiple SDKs, multiple platforms, multiple programming languages, many APIs, and there's just a lot of complexity that comes with it. And Swift Playgrounds is purposefully kept simple. And so it's just a really nice environment to take your first steps in programming. And we're just very happy to see kids and students around the world picking it up and learning how to code.
And I think I will add too, one of the really interesting aspects of that is not only what's inside Swift Playgrounds itself, but also the Everyone Can Code curriculum that's been built around it by our education team, which I think is an incredible resource for people, leading them on that path. It actually starts in Swift Playgrounds and can go all the way into Xcode and building your first apps.
So Malte, you should learn Swift now. You know it.
Yeah.
You Xcode guy.
Objective-C guy, yeah. Maybe
yeah, Objective-C.
Maybe I ask the question now that I have left for this. As Jean-Claude said, I'm an Objective-C guy. I still learned app development with Objective-C, and I'm sorry to confess, so far I was too lazy to switch to Swift. I've read a lot of books, but yeah, somehow I always end up with the old language for my 2 apps which I have on the App Store. Now, with the progress of Swift as a language, I'm wondering how long will it last that we will have Objective-C? I'm very grateful that Apple made this available the whole time, and all the new, most of the APIs support Objective-C. But will I have to switch soon, or will Objective-C be around for a while?
You know, I'm going to actually say that those are 2 different questions, because I hope what's happening is that Swift is so compelling that you can't resist the urge to adopt it immediately. Because it is. It's a much simpler programming language. It's safe. It's fast. It has all these amazing qualities. Objective-C is the basis of a vast amount of code on our platforms. And, you know, it is not going anywhere anytime soon. You're not going to have to, like, stop using Objective-C and switch to Swift on date X. And I see a very long future ahead for Objective-C. I think that what you are seeing now is that there are an increasing number of APIs that we're going to build that are Swift only. And so there is going to come a point where, as a developer, not only is Swift as a language a very compelling offering in terms of its simplicity, its expressiveness, its power, but also the fact that there are going to be APIs that are uniquely available there. I know, Andreas, you have some experience in Objective-C, I think about 30 years or more now.
That's probably right. But we do really see the advantages of Swift as a more modern language. Swift is really designed with these 3 principles that Wiley actually touched on in mind. It's modern, it's safe, and it's fast. So it's easy to learn. It avoids or maybe even eliminates entire classes of bugs that developers can make in other languages. And it also is the best way to really take full advantage of our modern processor technologies with the M1 and now the M2 chip. So our recommendation is certainly for developers to consider switching over to Swift. It is a language that we think is going to make them more successful. And like Wiley said, we are certainly going to start bringing out more and more APIs that will be Swift only. Swift Charts is maybe a great example for a new type of API that we're adding this year that is Swift only, and I think it's a great enabler to make applications feel more alive, and you would see us doing more of those things. Switching over to Swift.
If I may add this, Swift regex is also a very wonderful API. It's very useful for developers.
That's right. It will make string processing a lot easier, and we think it's going to be very popular with developers.
I noticed that was, I think, the biggest applause line of the State of the Union, at least in person. So a lot of love for Swift regex.
Nothing better than good regex support.
Yeah.
I have a small question about app clips, App clips, I think now it's possible that they can use 15 meg, that they can have a size of 15 megabits that was increased. But here in Switzerland, but I think in Europe as well, app clips is, I hardly ever see some app clips. I was in the Silicon Valley now, and there I realized almost every coffee shop and all that, they have these little web clips to do something, but here it is not such a case. What do you think? What will happen with these app clips in the future? Will it now expand when they can be bigger? That means they can be more complex?
So I think that there's 2 questions there, sort of what's behind the idea of increasing the size and what do we see ahead for app clips. And on the first one, we introduced app clips a couple of years ago. And one of the things that we've been doing is looking really hard at, particularly with the rollout of 5G in a lot of global markets, how network performance has been improving. And it has really struck us that the user is at the center of what we defined in the app clip experience. We wanted that to be something that you could download really quickly in the moment to get a very focused piece of functionality when and where you needed it. And that is what drove the idea of a size limit for download to begin with. Well, it turns out that if you can now very quickly download 15 megabytes, we know that that's going to open a lot of new possibilities for developers. There may be frameworks that they want to include that now are inside that available amount of space that they couldn't have included before. And it's going to open new kinds of functionality. And so clearly it expands what can be done with an app clip in a really useful way, all while remaining really focused on that experience of that super quick download in the moment. When you talk about the future of app clips, I think we had the great misfortune to launch app clips in the middle of a global pandemic that drove most people indoors. And these kind of experiences in the moment in a place that you go just were not at top of mind for a lot of people. And in fact, we had a huge amount of interest in app clips early on. And a lot of those developers came back and said, we're waiting a little while because it turns out everybody's inside right now. What we're seeing now is, of course, renewed interest and energy around them. And we're really excited to see some of the things that are on the road ahead for app clips.
Yeah, good point. Thanks.
You already mentioned what got the biggest applause, what new feature at the WWDC. For me, as a spectator who doesn't know much about programming, it's always interesting. How do you decide what features you're going to bring next? Obviously, developers have huge wish lists, just like tech journalists have as well. How do you decide what you prioritize for each year? Do you do it by year? How does it work? I guess that's a big part of your job, picking what we're going to do next.
Well, Andreas consults soothsayers and I mean, in all seriousness, I think it's always a balance, right? And you have essentially a universe of possibilities that are informed by things like the feedback from our developers. We get a huge amount of input from the developer community on what they want to see next. We have our own vision of where we go with strategy and where we want to take our languages and our tools and our frameworks and capabilities. And then we also have the reality of resources, which is that we have to decide, of course, what we're going to be able to accomplish and do it at a level of quality that we think is going to really satisfy our developer community. I don't know, Andreas, you do this in your job. So
yeah, from the developer perspective, WWDC is actually a great starting point for us for every year to plan out the next release. When we get the direct feedback from our community on what their needs are and what they hope for us to bring to the platform. That is the input that we use to kind of plan out our next features and APIs. And on top of that, we can kind of observe what we are doing internally, what our own app teams need. We can talk to our own colleagues at Apple to find out what the needs of app developers are and then formulate it as features either in our tools, our APIs. And so it's just a regular process that we go through to learn about what the next steps are that people want to take, the next goals they want to achieve with their apps.
Plus, I guess now with Apple Silicon, you get even the hardware guys on board, something that wasn't possible before with Intel, where you just had this fixed thing, and now I guess you can talk with them as well.
Yeah, we have this super tight integration between our silicon, our hardware design teams, our software teams, and it's really what makes Apple platforms, Apple platforms. They are so tightly integrated.
My next topic is Siri. I really like to see the new App Intents API, which will be introduced in the next iOS 16 release. And we all want Siri to understand as well. And until now, not every app could be controlled by a Siri. Now, with this new API, is there a chance, or will Siri as we know it change significantly as a result?
I mean, that's a very big question. I think when I look at App Intents, it's really exciting because what it does is it's going to really give this great opportunity for developers to expose functionality in their apps through Siri. But also, very importantly, to me, in some ways, just as important as the Siri experience is through things like Spotlight. It's not just the question of I can utter this thing and now the app goes and does my bidding, but that I actually can be searching for the app or actually have the app recommended to me because of the circumstances that we proactively recommend to you, and actually see those actions that are created by App Intents exposed right there in the UI. It's also really important because it immediately enables functions to be used in shortcuts. And of course, shortcuts is very powerful. One of the coolest things about shortcuts is that it is not just about exposing a function in a single app. It's about enabling the end user to combine the capabilities of different apps to create kind of completely unforeseen possibilities for automating different kinds of activities. And so that to me is the power of App Intents. It's the fact that it can now integrate beautifully with so many different parts of the system, that it can expose so many different kinds of experiences that show users what's possible in these apps and allow them to do things automatically that way. There is one other piece of App Intents that's pretty cool. We talked about focus filters and focus, and App Intents is actually the API behind how focus filters can, in fact, show just a given kind of function in an app based on your current focus.
I have a question about, well, it's also a huge topic, but about the desktop class apps for iPad. I learned that multitasking now is much better, RAM management is much better and easier for iPad apps. What do you expect developers will do now? Will we see now more Mac apps, big Mac apps, let's say like that comes to the iPad in the future with these new possibilities and functionalities?
Yeah, the iPad has really matured as a platform, and it very much can act as a pro device, and so I think users are talking to developers about getting pro apps that exist on the Mac, on the iPad as well, and we see a lot of developers actually bringing their apps to the iPad, and that's why we introduced these new APIs that I described earlier to enable developers to bring the same pro experiences that they are familiar with on the Mac to the iPad as well.
And I think you also touched on the fact that we're building not just these really great user interface APIs and capabilities that enable more desktop class functionality in these apps, but also the infrastructure in the OS itself. So features obviously for windowing like Stage Manager, but also the fact that there's now virtual memory swap on iPad, and that not only kind of raises the bar for every app on the device, but also gives more memory to the most demanding apps on a device. So you, I think, can now have up to a maximum of 16 gigabytes of RAM for an app that's like a pro app or something like that. And I'm pretty excited, because I'm a nerd and I like these things, about DriverKit support. It's the same API for Mac and now available for iPad. And so I think we're going to see some interesting new classes of capabilities, particularly in more the kind of pro-oriented space, come to iPad as a result of this.
Now that you mentioned DriverKit, which was one of my favorite announcements as well, can you at least catch a bit what will be possible with DriverKit? Because it sounds so abstract when you read it in the presentation, and I guess it has so much potential, especially for me, like being an audio guy. I have very high hopes for it. What can people expect with DriverKit?
Well, of course, at the top line, the capabilities are going to be that it supports USB, PCI, and audio drivers. And I think audio is the area where we're going to see the most exciting stuff happen initially with DriverKit. And that's partly because of the kind of infrastructure that's built into iPad as a platform, partly because of the kinds of apps that are already available with iPad as a platform. And so iPad has already been fantastic for music. Core Audio has enabled some really exciting different kinds of apps and capabilities on the platform. And now if you marry that capability to, even more interesting pro-level hardware, I think you're going to have some very exciting things that are going to happen on iPad with audio.
Can't wait.
Well, speaking about Mac apps and iPad, I was surprised to see that Mac Catalyst has been improved with the next release. Can you explain to us what are the improvements of Mac Catalyst?
So Mac Catalyst is our technology that makes it really easy for iPad developers to bring their apps to the Mac. And the most important role of Mac Catalyst, when we evolve, is it to make sure that that path is smooth and that all the new APIs that come to iPad also come to the Mac in Mac Catalyst, so that this path of bringing the same code base to the Mac just stays open. And on top of that, we are of course looking at small improvements we can make to enable developers to make small customizations just to get a little bit more out of the Mac, like giving them access to the keyboard in a more refined way, or other kind of little Mac-specific things that don't exist on the iPad. And so Mac Catalyst, by design, will always be mostly the APIs that exist for iOS with a few customizations that you can go through just to get a little bit more out of the Mac.
Is it just me, just to jump in here real quick? For me, it looks like a little bit like the journey you've made with Mac apps and iPad apps was, first we had these, with the M1 Macs, we had the possibilities to run iPad apps on the Mac with Mac Catalyst and with the possibility to adapt them to the Mac. And now with the iPad Pro apps, we have the other way around. Is that correct? That now we are fully, we can do both, but first it was more a little bit of transition from the iPad to the Mac, it seemed to me. Is that possible to say like that, or I'm wrong?
I think it really goes both ways. The two platforms benefit from each other, and some of the great ideas and experiences we implemented on the iPad come to the Mac because we find that it is a really great feature there as well, and it goes the other way around at the same time. I really think these two devices are perfect for collaborating with each other, and we see a lot of our users using both Macs and iPads together, sometimes at the same time. Our continuity features often enable workflows that are really great to combine the two devices together, and so I think it's just a really great pair, and we think that developers will bring their apps to both platforms.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think the software capabilities that we've been delivering, you mentioned universal control and continuity and the kinds of things that enables, and also obviously the things that we've just announced in terms of desktop class iPad and driver kit and VM swap on the iPad and all these other things are really important. The other key element, I think, is the power of M1. It's an incredible capability that we're bringing with Apple Silicon across both platforms, and kind of sized appropriately to each of these different form factors. Really, though, bringing a huge amount of pro-level capability to iPad and Mac both. And so I think it's a really exciting time to be building for both of these platforms.
You already mentioned Driver Kit as one of your favorites. Now that we come to an end of this interview, can you each of you tell me what was your favorite announcement of WWDC? Maybe something that was a bit overlooked, or something that's just something you've been working on forever and wanting to show the world. What were your favorites?
Well, I personally am very excited about Xcode Cloud, and I'm very happy that it is now out of beta state, available to all developers, and I just hope that they will take advantage of it.
And personally, for me, Xcode Cloud, I think it's the thing I was most looking forward to, is seeing Xcode Cloud become available. And, I'd add to that I think some of the new capabilities in SwiftUI, things like layout and WeatherKit. I mean, I know you said at the opening, you love weather. I'm a weather nerd. I had to confess to the people who built WeatherKit that the first app I built with Xcode was actually a weather app. Using, I think, Yahoo's weather API back in 2003. And so I have a soft spot in my heart for weather.
Same as we have. Well, Andreas, Wiley, thank you very much that you took your time for this interesting conversation with us. We would be incredibly happy to talk to you again sometime. And I know it's still WWDC week. You're busy people. So for today, I say thank you and have a great rest of the WWDC week.
Thank you very much, guys.